The night is quiet, the air resting heavy on your skin. In the distance you can almost hear the low hum of the world turning, as if the earth itself is waiting for you to listen. History, as we know it, begins with a neat story. It is the story that every textbook recites. Small groups of hunters and gatherers roaming the wild, then villages forming along rivers, then kingdoms with their temples and armies, and finally the nations and technologies of the modern age. It is an arrow pointing upward, a line stretching forward without interruption, a story that seems both clean and comforting. But beneath that story, there is an unasked question. What if that timeline is incomplete? What if the neatness of its structure is only an illusion, built not on certainty, but on fragments that happen to survive? The title of this journey places the question at the center. What if an advanced civilization thrived on Earth 100,000 years ago? Not merely a lost city or forgotten tribe, but an entire world of knowledge, art, and science. A civilization that rose high, lived fully, and then disappeared so completely that we no longer see it in the record of time. To hold that question is to feel the ground shift under your feet. 100,000 years. Consider that span carefully. The oldest written texts we have go back about 5,000 years. The first great cities, Uruk in Mesopotamia, the temple complexes along the Nile, no more than 6,000 years. Even Göbekli Tepe, one of the oldest monumental sites ever found, is only around 11,000 years. Beyond that, there is silence. We assume that silence means simplicity, stone tools, fires, caves, wandering bands. Yet silence does not mean absence. Silence may mean only that the earth has swallowed more than we know. Think about how history survives. It is not a balanced record. It is a fragile thing, vulnerable to rain, fire, the movement of soil. A clay tablet can last if buried in desert sand. A stone temple endures if protected by dry air. But wood rots, cloth disintegrates, metals rust, paper burns, and even stone wears down when exposed to the endless cycle of seasons. The deeper into time we look, the fewer traces remain. Our knowledge of the past rests not on certainty, but on luck. The luck of what has lasted long enough to be found, and the luck of where we have chosen to dig. Imagine our world today. Skyscrapers rise into the air, satellites orbit above, servers hum with billions of messages every hour. If all of this ended tomorrow, what would be left in 100,000 years? Concrete would crumble, glass would shatter. Plastic, though persistent, would fragment into dust under sunlight and water. Forests would reclaim the cities. Oceans would rise and fall over the coasts. Glaciers would scrape the continents. Even our proudest monuments would dissolve. The Great Pyramid of Giza, which has endured 5,000 years, would, after 100,000, likely be reduced to a featureless mound of eroded stone. New mountain ranges might rise, rivers shift course, and coastlines vanish. The earth itself would have rewritten the land. Now, return to the question. If a civilization thrived 100 millennia ago, what evidence could we possibly expect to find? Archaeology depends on what can be preserved and what we choose to seek. But the methods we use, shallow digs in deserts, caves, river valleys, are designed for the past few thousand years, not for spans 10 or 20 times longer. It is like searching for whispers in a storm. We look in places where evidence is likely, not where it is least expected. The result is a picture of history that fits the neatness we desire, but may not reflect the fullness of what happened. And so, the idea of a forgotten civilization is not simply speculation. It is a reminder of how fragile memory is. We call our age the pinnacle, the first time knowledge, technology, and art have reached such heights. Yet what if others came before us? What if the cycle of rise and fall, creation and erasure, is not unique to us, but part of a longer rhythm of the earth itself? Civilizations may be like waves, rising, cresting, collapsing, their foam dissolving into the sea of time, leaving only faint traces in the sand. The unsettling truth is that we have lived only within a narrow window of the past. Homo sapiens, our species, is at least 300,000 years old. For 95% of that span, we assume simplicity. But assumption is not proof. Our ancestors had brains as large and complex as ours. They lived with challenges that required intelligence, adaptability, and imagination. They used language, fire, tools. To think they could not have gone further is to underestimate them, to impose our need for uniqueness upon a story we barely understand. This is where the journey begins. Not with certainty, but with humility. Not with a claim of what was, but with a question of what could have been. What if, long before Sumer or Egypt, before the first temple stones were lifted into place, before the first marks of writing scratched into clay, there was another story? A civilization that did not survive the weight of time. A people who dreamed and built and vanished, leaving the earth to cover their traces. The earth is old. Older than our stories, older than our memory, older than the span of human imagination. What we call history is a brief flare against that darkness, a few thousand years of light in an ocean of silence. To explore the possibility of an ancient advanced civilization is to acknowledge that silence, and to wonder what may be hidden within it. And so we begin, standing at the edge of the known, looking down into the depths of forgotten time. The textbooks give us a timeline that feels solid, but beneath that surface, the ground shifts. 100,000 years stretch out before us, vast, silent, unknowable. And in that silence, the question waits. What lies beneath the pages we no longer have, beneath the soil that has folded and refolded, beneath the silence that has erased so much? The question is not whether we can prove what happened. The question is whether we are willing to open ourselves to what might have happened and to follow that path through the shadows of time. For if the earth has hidden a story older than all we know, then we are not at the beginning, but only somewhere in the middle. The ground you walk upon feels solid, dependable, as though it has always been there. Yet that sense of permanence is an illusion. Time is not gentle with the earth. It scrapes, folds, grinds, and consumes. To imagine a civilization from 100,000 years ago, we must first confront what time does to memory. The very surface of the planet is not a stage that holds its props forever, but a restless tide that washes them away. Erosion is the first storyteller. Grain by grain, wind carries sand across stone, polishing mountains into gentle slopes, grinding carvings into formless rubble. Rain falls, seeping into cracks, freezing and expanding until rock splits into fragments. Rivers wander, abandoning their banks, carving new channels, dragging everything in their path downstream. Over a human lifetime, the changes are subtle. Over 1,000 years, valleys deepen and coasts shift. Over 100,000, entire landscapes are unrecognizable. Consider the monuments we prize today. The Great Pyramid of Giza has stood for 5,000 years, its limestone blocks resisting desert winds. Yet even now, its surface is weathered, its casing stones gone. Project that into 100,000 years, 20 times longer, and the pyramid would be unrecognizable. Not a monument, but a mound of stone indistinguishable from a natural hill. Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, the skyscrapers of our modern age, all would dissolve, collapse, or sink beneath soil. What seems indestructible to us is fragile in the scale of deep time. Glaciers are another eraser. During the last ice age, vast ice sheets advanced across continents. A glacier does not merely cover, it destroys. Moving at the pace of centuries, it grinds bedrock to dust, scours valleys into new shapes, and scatters boulders hundreds of miles. If cities had stood in their path, they would not have survived. Walls would crumble, towers collapse, artifacts scatter. The slow crushing weight of ice would erase all distinction between what was natural and what was made. When the ice retreated, the scars would remain, but not the ruins. And then, the oceans. At the height of glacial cycles, sea levels dropped more than 100 meters, exposing vast plains that are now submerged. When the ice melted, the seas rose, reclaiming those lands. If civilizations thrived along those ancient coasts, as ours do today, their homes and monuments would now lie drowned, battered by currents, buried under layers of silt. In time, coral and sand would cover the remains, and the ocean floor would claim them as its own. What once was city becomes seafloor, hidden in the restless dark. Beyond erosion, beyond ice, the Earth itself is in motion. Tectonic plates drift like rafts on molten seas. Land rises and sinks. Mountains grow as continents collide. Whole regions are swallowed back into the mantle, their surface melted, recycled into the deep. The ground we walk on today is not the same ground that existed 100,000 years ago. A civilization could have risen, built, flourished, and been consumed. Not just erased from view, but erased from existence, its stones melted into fire. Decay works on every scale. Wood rots within years. Textiles disintegrate. Leather crumbles to powder. Even metal, which we imagine as strong, corrodes quickly. Iron rusts to flakes. Copper turns green, then breaks apart. Aluminum oxidizes and fragments. Gold endures longest, but even gold dispersed and scattered loses its form. Plastics, so persistent in our own era, crack and shatter under sunlight, breaking down into fragments that drift with the wind and sea. On the scale of centuries, some artifacts survive. On the scale of tens of millennia, almost none. Archaeology itself is bound by these limits. We search shallow layers, dig where preservation is most likely, caves, deserts, riverbeds. These places are valuable, but they are fragments. A civilization that thrived 100,000 years ago might have left traces in places we never look. Deep beneath ice, far below the sea, in strata buried by shifting earth. To say there is no evidence is not to say nothing existed, but that we have not yet searched in the places where survival might be possible. This is the weight of time, not only the erosion of stone and metal, but the erosion of memory. Oral traditions survive for thousands of years at best, carried by voices, altered by each generation. Writing, even carved into stone, crumbles when centuries multiply into tens of thousands. In 100,000 years, stories are lost, artifacts destroyed, landscapes rewritten. What remains is silence, and in that silence we may mistake absence for certainty. Pause and consider our own world. If tomorrow our cities fell empty, how long would their memory endure? Within decades, windows would shatter, vegetation would crawl across concrete. Within centuries, bridges would collapse, roads break apart, steel rust away. Within millennia, only scattered fragments would remain. After 100,000 years, the forests would return, rivers would reclaim their valleys, deserts shift across plains. Future explorers would find only natural landscapes, the traces of our presence erased as thoroughly as chalk washed from a board. And yet, silence is not absolute. Sometimes fragments survive, a shard of pottery buried in sediment, a bone preserved in ash, a painting sealed in a cave. These are the rare exceptions, the lucky survivors. They remind us that even within the erasing power of time, memory can linger in unexpected places. If an advanced civilization thrived 100 millennia ago, its legacy may not be grand ruins or towering monuments, but subtle hints, a chemical anomaly, a layer of sediment out of place, a pattern in the earth that defies explanation. The weight of time does not answer our question, it deepens it. For if time erases almost everything, how can we be sure of what was not there? What confidence can we place in a timeline built only on fragments that survived by chance? The Earth has many ways of keeping its secrets, and 100,000 years is more than enough to bury them. The silence that follows is not empty. It is charged, alive with possibility. If the Earth has concealed entire worlds beneath ice, drowned them beneath seas, folded them back into molten rock, then what else has been hidden from us? And if silence can hold so much, where should we look next for the faintest shadows of what might once have been? The horizon in Antarctica is endless white, a surface so still it seems eternal. In Greenland too, the ice stretches across frozen plains where sky and ground blur into one. These places feel outside of time, barren and empty, untouched by human history. And yet, They may be the most important vaults of all. Beneath their kilometers of compacted snow and ice lie worlds that have been sealed away for hundreds of thousands of years. To imagine an advanced civilization thriving 100 millennia ago is to ask, if they built anything, where might it still be preserved? The answer may not be deserts or caves, but here, under frozen silence. Glaciers are not only destroyers, they are preservers. Within their depths, bubbles of ancient air remain intact, carrying the breath of long-lost ages. Pollen, ash, fragments of atmosphere, all are trapped within narrow layers that accumulate year after year. Scientists drill into these archives and pull up slender cylinders of ice, cores that stretch back more than 800,000 years. Each layer is a page in a book of climate, recording volcanic eruptions, shifts in temperature, even traces of great fires. If such precision exists for the natural world, what might be hidden in these pages about the human world? Could there be anomalies, chemical signals or unfamiliar particles that hint at activity far beyond what we assume for the deep past? Consider what we already know. In Greenland's ice, researchers have detected lead pollution from Roman smelting, spikes of soot from medieval industry, even radioactive isotopes from 20th century nuclear tests. Human fingerprints etched into frozen layers survive for millennia. If our own activities leave marks that endure in ice, then perhaps an older civilization, if it once existed, left traces too. A sudden spike of carbon dioxide, an unusual isotope, a fragment of synthetic material. To find such signs would require looking for them, and here lies the problem. We rarely search for what we do not expect. Antarctica intensifies the mystery. Beneath its thick ice sheet lie hidden landscapes, mountain ranges taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, lakes sealed off from the surface for millions of years. Radar mapping reveals shapes and contours beneath the ice, long ridges, curved formations, patterns that seem almost deliberate. Most are natural, the product of geology and ice. But some invite speculation. What if, in warmer epochs, Antarctica's coasts were habitable? Fossilized plants discovered at its margins suggest that forests once flourished there. If humans, or beings like humans, ever lived along those coasts, their remains would now lie buried under thousands of meters of frozen weight. Not destroyed, but entombed, waiting in silence. Preservation under ice has precedent. In Siberia, mammoths have been uncovered with fur still intact, their bodies frozen in permafrost for tens of thousands of years. Seeds trapped in ice have sprouted after 40 millennia. Air sealed in bubbles has held its breath for ages beyond our imagination. If nature can endure in such ways, why not the works of intelligence? If tools, structures, or archives were built and later buried beneath advancing glaciers, they might survive. Not visible, but preserved in conditions as close to timeless as the Earth provides. Yet the ice is both guardian and jailer. To reach what lies beneath requires drilling through miles of frozen weight, an effort costly and rare. And archaeology has not made this a priority. Cores are studied for climate science, not for hidden civilizations. If anomalies have already been found, they may have been dismissed, catalogued as contamination or unexplained noise. The silence of expectation blinds us. We do not look for civilizations under ice because we do not believe they could be there. Now imagine our own world reversed into that silence. Suppose cities like New York, Paris, or Beijing were overtaken by glaciers. Within centuries, their buildings would collapse, their bridges crumble. Within millennia, their ruins would flatten, pressed into the ground. After 100,000 years, they would exist only as distorted outlines, fragments sealed deep below the ice. To any future explorers, the surface would appear barren. Only by drilling deep could they uncover hints of a world long gone. This thought experiment is not speculation, it is inevitability. If ice advanced again, this is what would happen to us. And if it could happen to us, might it have happened before? Antarctica also holds a more haunting allure. Myths from scattered cultures speak of lands in the far south, places of mystery and loss. Maps like the Piri-Reis chart of 1513 have fueled speculation, showing outlines of a southern continent centuries before its discovery. Scholars argue these are coincidences or imaginative projections, yet for some they whisper of an older memory, fragments of knowledge carried across time, distorted but not erased. Could there have been stories, long before history, of lands that were once green, then swallowed by ice? The frozen silence of these continents is a paradox. It is absolute, and yet it is full. Beneath the ice are not only landscapes, but archives of time. Each layer is a record, each bubble a voice, each hidden valley a secret. What lies there may not be grand monuments or intact cities, but subtler things. Chemical signatures, unfamiliar isotopes, traces of activity beyond what nature alone can produce. To find them requires not only tools, but imagination, the willingness to ask if the silence hides more than it reveals. Standing at the edge of Antarctica, it is easy to see nothing but emptiness, yet to gaze across that whiteness is to stare at possibility. The ice is not eternal. It advances and retreats. What it covers now was once open land. What it entombs may one day emerge again, and if memory can be preserved within its depths, then perhaps the forgotten chapters of civilization too lie there, waiting. The glaciers do not answer, they only hold. Their weight is measured not just in frozen water, but in centuries, in millennia, in forgotten ages. If civilizations have risen and fallen, the ice may be the only place where their breath still lingers. And if ice can preserve such shadows, then what of water? If frozen continents may guard forgotten worlds, how many more might lie drowned, scattered across the seabed, hidden beneath the restless waves? The sea is never still. Waves lap against the edges of continents, carrying with them whispers of what once lay exposed. But when we think of the oceans, we often forget how recently their boundaries changed. Only 20,000 years ago, the world looked very different. Glaciers locked away so much water that global sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Coastlines stretched far into what is now seabed. Vast plains connected islands. Valleys and rivers, now drowned, ran across the exposed continental shelves. What is ocean now was once land, fertile and alive. If people built and thrived 100,000 years ago, much of their world might have been swallowed whole by the rising seas. Imagine the English Channel not as water but as open ground. Britain connected to Europe by a wide plain where forests and rivers stretched. Imagine Southeast Asia as a single continent, the Sunda Shelf, binding together lands we now know as Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Imagine Beringia, a vast land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, open for human passage. And imagine the Arabian Gulf as dry land, a fertile basin surrounded by rivers. All of these were real landscapes during lower sea levels, but now they lie beneath waves. The ocean has reclaimed them, and with that reclamation, it has hidden whatever lives or civilizations may have flourished there. Archaeology is already aware of this loss. In rare cases, divers and researchers have found stone tools and traces of settlements on submerged coasts. Off the shores of India, sonar has revealed structures buried beneath silt, their origins debated. In the Mediterranean, ancient harbours and drowned towns are preserved under the sea. These finds, however, are all from recent millennia. They are reminders that human history hugs the shoreline, and when seas rise, that history drowns. If so much has been lost in a few thousand years, what of 100,000? How much more might be waiting beneath deeper waters, sealed away beyond easy reach? The oceans are not kind to memory. Salt corrodes, waves batter, storms scour the seabed. Wooden structures collapse quickly, fabrics rot, metals dissolve. Even stone is tumbled and broken, buried under layers of sand and mud. Yet preservation is possible. In some places, silt covers and protects. In others, oxygen-poor waters keep artifacts intact for millennia. Consider shipwrecks preserved in the cold depths of the Baltic Sea, their timbers still recognizable after centuries. If conditions align, traces can survive far longer than we assume. But to find them, one must know where to look, and the sea is vast. Estimates suggest that at the end of the last ice age, more than 20 million square kilometers of land were submerged, an area roughly the size of North America. Imagine that as potential real estate for ancient peoples. Rivers, valleys, plains, all natural places for settlement, now hidden underwater. If an advanced civilization existed 100,000 years ago, it may have chosen these same fertile regions. Today, they lie beneath hundreds of meters of ocean, untouched, unexplored, invisible to us. Our technology to search these places is young. Sonar can map the seafloor, but detailed surveys are rare and costly. Submersibles and remotely operated vehicles can explore, but only in narrow windows. Drilling into sediments is expensive and technically demanding. Archaeology has barely begun to scratch the surface of drowned worlds. Most research focuses on accessible ruins close to shore, not the continental shelves stretching far beyond. This bias shapes what we believe. Because we have not looked, we assume nothing is there. But silence at the bottom of the sea is not absence. It is simply unexplored. The myths of drowned worlds echo this reality. Plato's Atlantis, swallowed by the sea in a single night, has captivated imaginations for centuries. Indigenous traditions in Australia recall coasts swallowed by water, stories that align with real sea level rise after the last ice age. Ancient Sanskrit texts speak of kingdoms destroyed by floods. Native American stories tell of great deluges and lands lost to rising waters. These myths, spread across the globe, may not be literal accounts, but they reflect a memory of loss, a recognition that the sea can take whole worlds. Perhaps they are distorted echoes of real landscapes now drowned, places once inhabited, now invisible beneath the waves. If we drain the oceans, what would we see? Vast plains carved by rivers, ridges and hills, plateaus where settlements could have thrived. The North Sea would reveal Doggerland, a wide plain once home to human hunters. The Sunda Shelf would stretch as fertile lowlands, capable of supporting entire populations. The Gulf of Mexico would show a coastline miles farther out, exposing now submerged caves and valleys. Each of these drowned worlds is a reminder. The past was not shaped only by what we see on land today. Much of it lies hidden underwater, beyond sight and memory. And if we consider 100,000 years, the problem deepens. Sea levels did not shift once, but many times, rising and falling with the rhythm of ice ages. Lands opened, then drowned, again and again. Civilizations, if they existed, may have built in these places during low seas, only to have their remains swallowed as waters returned. The ocean floor may hold layer upon layer of forgotten coasts, each erasing the one before. What chance do we have to find such traces when the sea itself has rewritten the record so many times? To picture this is to recognize our own fragility. Our cities cluster along coasts: New York, Tokyo, London, Shanghai, Rio de Janeiro. If seas rose by even a few dozen meters, they would be gone. Extend that to 100 meters, and entire nations vanish. Imagine future explorers, 100,000 years from now, diving where New York once stood, searching through silt and stone for traces of a civilization they barely believe existed. What they would find of us is uncertain. Perhaps nothing. And if our world can be lost so easily, why not others? The drowned continents and sunken shores of the earth remind us that history is not confined to what we see on the surface. Much of it may lie beneath the sea, hidden not because it never existed, but because the waters rose to cover it. The ocean is a veil drawn across memory, and until we lift it, we cannot know what lies beneath. The waves continue their rhythm, patient and unchanging. They tell us nothing of what they conceal. But if the sea can hide so much, then perhaps the myths of lost lands are not just stories, but fragments of truth. And if civilizations can vanish beneath water, what else might be hidden in the fragile materials they left behind, lost to time not only by drowning, but by decay itself? In a museum case behind glass and careful lighting, a chipped stone tool rests. Its edges are rough, its form simple. Visitors lean in and read the plaque. 100,000 years old. Tja, The object seems unimpressive, almost crude, and yet for archaeologists it is invaluable. Why? Because it survived. Not because it was the most important tool of its time, not because it tells the whole story, but because stone is stubborn. It resists decay longer than wood, longer than fabric, longer than bone. What we see of the distant past is not what was most common, nor what was most advanced. It is simply what lasted. This is the survival bias of history. We imagine early humans dressed in skins, crouched by fires, holding simple stone axes. That is the picture painted by the artifacts we find. But it is a distorted picture. Imagine our own world reduced in the same way. If only the most durable materials survived 100,000 years into the future, what would people see? Chipped glass, rusted steel, fragments of stone buildings. They would not see the circuits in our computers, the fragile fabrics of our clothes, the architecture of wood and concrete that defines our cities. They would reconstruct our world as primitive because only primitive-looking fragments survived. The same bias shapes our view of the distant past. Stone tools endure, so we imagine our ancestors as people of stone. Cave paintings remain, so we imagine their art confined to caves. Bones fossilize, so we picture their lives as harsh, short, and simple. But what of textiles, woven with care? What of houses made of wood or clay, painted and adorned? What of knowledge encoded in forms that did not endure? All of it could have vanished, leaving us with only a narrow sliver of truth. Survival bias is not unique to archaeology. In every field, what endures shapes what we believe. Ancient music has no sound, only instruments left behind. Ancient stories survive only if written, otherwise they fade with the voices that carried them. Even in our own families, photographs survive while memories fade, creating the illusion that what was photographed was all that mattered. History is filtered not by what was most important, but by what refused to disappear. Consider textiles as an example. Woven fabrics degrade quickly in most climates. Unless sealed in dry caves or frozen in ice, they vanish within centuries. Yet where they do survive, as in the deserts of Egypt or the frozen graves of Siberia, they reveal astonishing skill, dyes, patterns, weaving techniques that show sophistication far beyond what we assumed. If so much artistry can be lost in only a few thousand years, how much more has vanished across 100,000? Or consider wood. Entire houses, temples, even tools may have been built from wood, chosen for its abundance and flexibility. But wood is vulnerable. In humid climates, it rots within decades. In arid zones, it cracks and crumbles. In fire, it disappears at once. The absence of wooden structures in the archaeological record does not mean they were absent from ancient life. It means the earth did not keep them. Even metals, which we imagine as strong, are fragile in time. Iron rusts swiftly when exposed. Copper corrodes into green flakes. Bronze, though tougher, eventually breaks down. Only gold resists, and even then, scattered fragments may vanish into soil. If a civilization relied on metals, their tools might be gone by now, unless buried in unusual conditions. The fact that we do not find them is not proof they were never there. It is proof that time is a patient eraser. This bias also touches how we interpret intelligence. Because we find only crude-looking objects, we assume crude minds. But the human brain of 100,000 years ago was as large and as complex as ours. Anatomically, modern humans already had the capacity for language, abstract thought, symbolic art. We underestimate them because the evidence that could prove otherwise, complex objects of wood, textiles, or biodegradable composites, did not survive. Our sense of superiority rests on an accident of preservation. Pause for a moment and imagine our own world filtered through survival bias. Far into the future, archaeologists dig and find only fragments of stone and rusted metal. They piece together a story of a primitive people, unaware that those same people once flew satellites, mapped the stars, split the atom, and communicated across oceans instantly. The picture would be wrong, yet it would be all they had. We risk making the same mistake when we look backward. Survival bias reminds us to be humble. It warns that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It asks us to consider the possibility that what we see of the past is a fraction, skewed toward what endures. If an advanced civilization lived 100,000 years ago, its tools may not have been stone. Its art may not have been paint on cave walls. Its knowledge may not have been etched in durable clay. Instead, it may have been built on materials, technologies, or systems that disappeared, leaving us with nothing but silence. The silence is seductive because it feels like certainty. We look at what remains and tell ourselves, this is the whole story. But it is not. It is the story of what survived, not what existed. Between the two lies a gap as vast as the distance between a shard of pottery and the civilization that crafted it. Think of it another way. If you were to reconstruct a person's life from what remains in their attic after a century, what would you know? A handful of letters, a broken photograph, a pair of shoes. From these fragments, you might imagine a life of simplicity, unaware of the laughter, the loves, the knowledge, the complexities that vanished with time. So it is with civilizations. What we hold in museums are attic fragments. They whisper, but they do not sing the whole song. This is why survival bias matters to our question. If we assume that absence equals non-existence, we close the door on possibility. But if we recognize that time preserves only fragments, we open ourselves to the thought that what has not survived might once have been real. That recognition does not prove an advanced civilization thrived 100,000 years ago, but it keeps the possibility alive. And that possibility is enough to guide our journey further. The bias of survival shows us that the record of the past is fragile and incomplete. It is not a window, but a narrow crack through which we glimpse only what time has spared. If we look through that crack and see only stone tools, it does not mean the world beyond the crack was only stone. It means we must ask, what else was there beyond our sight, erased by time, yet perhaps once as real as the ground beneath our feet? And if survival bias blinds us to what was built of fragile things, then myths may be the other side of the story. Memories not made of stone, but carried in words, stories, and echoes passed down through generations. What the earth erases, perhaps memory preserves, even if in distorted form. The night sky has always been our oldest ceiling. Long before books, before tablets of clay, before chisels carved stone, stories rose with the smoke of campfires and drifted into the stars. Those stories still linger. They have been carried in voices across continents, repeated by elders to children, reshaped by each retelling. And though their forms change, some of them carry echoes of something older than we realize. If time erases stone and metal, perhaps memory preserves what the earth does not. Myths may be the last shadows of civilizations erased. Take Atlantis. The story is familiar. A great island civilization, powerful and advanced, destroyed in a single day and night by floods and earthquakes. Plato wrote of it around 360 BCE, presenting it as a cautionary tale of hubris. Scholars today debate its meaning. Many see it as allegory, others as invention. Yet Atlantis has endured in imagination for millennia because it speaks to a deeper pattern. The destruction of a great people by flood resonates because it feels like memory, not just metaphor. Look farther afield and the pattern deepens. In the traditions of Indigenous Australians, there are stories of coastlines swallowed by the sea. These are not abstract myths, but specific accounts of lands that once existed, later drowned. Geologists have confirmed that sea levels did indeed rise, consuming those coasts thousands of years ago. The stories survived far longer than the landscapes themselves. In India, Sanskrit texts tell of great kingdoms consumed by floods, cities lost beneath the ocean. In Mesopotamia, tales of a deluge sent by the gods echo through the Epic of Gilgamesh and later into the Bible story of Noah. In the Americas, native traditions recall times when the earth reshaped itself, when waters rose and peoples vanished. The similarities are striking. Across continents, cultures that never met tell of catastrophic floods, drowned lands, vanished peoples. Scholars often explain this as coincidence. Floods are common, rivers overflow, seas rise. Yet the persistence of these themes suggests more than random chance. It suggests memory, fragments of real events passed down through generations, reshaped into story. If myths can preserve the memory of geological events for 7,000 or 8,000 years, as they have in Australia, could they preserve fragments of even older events, events that may stretch back tens of thousands, perhaps even 100,000 years? Myths are not precise. They distort, they embellish, they weave gods and symbols into their fabric. But distortion does not mean invention. A city drowned by rising seas may, in memory, become a golden kingdom punished by the gods. A people displaced by climate may, in myth, become wanderers cursed by fate. Beneath the layers of imagination may lie a kernel of truth. Myth is not the opposite of history. It is history retold in the language of memory. Consider what happens when memory alone preserves a story. Each generation reshapes it slightly, but the core remains. Once the waters rose. Once the land was lost. Over centuries, detail shifts, symbols grow, but the event is not forgotten. The endurance of flood myths across the world may be more than metaphor. It may be humanity remembering, in scattered voices, that worlds have been lost before. This matters for our question. If an advanced civilization thrived 100,000 years ago, the Earth may have erased its physical remains. But if survivors lived on, even briefly, their stories might have been carried forward. Over tens of thousands of years, those stories would shift, mix with others, adapt to new cultures. By the time they reached us, they would look like myths: Atlantis, deluges, lost kingdoms, tales of cities swallowed by sea or fire. We dismiss them because they lack evidence, yet perhaps they are evidence of a different kind. Evidence carried not in stone, but in voice. There is power in oral tradition. In Australia, myths describe coastal landscapes now submerged, and researchers have linked them to sea level rise that occurred 7,000 years ago. The accuracy of these stories over such spans of time astonishes scientists. If memory can endure for 7,000 years, why not more? Why not 10 or 20 or even 50? Each retelling bends the story, but the essence survives. The flood came, the land was lost, people fled. Memory is fragile, but it is also persistent. What if the stories we treat as allegory are actually distorted history? What if flood myths, rather than being inventions to teach morals, are the last echoes of civilizations erased by rising seas and shifting climates? We may never confirm their truth with archaeology, but their persistence across cultures hints at something more. They remind us that humans have always carried memory in story, long after the Earth erased the evidence. Now imagine survivors of a great collapse 100,000 years ago. Their cities drowned, their monuments lost, their numbers scattered. Perhaps only fragments of their knowledge remained, warnings of flood, of destruction, of loss. Over generations, those warnings became myths. Their names were forgotten, their tools decayed, but their story endured in whispers. And when we hear the echo of those myths today, we may be listening to the last faint trace of their existence. The world's myths remind us that the silence of archaeology is not absolute. History may live on in memory even when artifacts are gone. If so, then myth is not merely entertainment. It is a vessel, a fragile thread that carries across the abyss of time. It asks us to listen not with the ears of certainty, but with humility, to wonder what truths may be folded inside. The myths are voices, faint but insistent. They speak of lands lost to water, of civilizations consumed by catastrophe, of worlds erased. Whether allegory or memory, they widen the frame of possibility. They keep alive the thought that we may not be the first to rise high, nor the first to be erased. And if myths can endure as echoes, what of science? If stories preserve memory in words, perhaps the earth itself preserves memory in stone and ice. Perhaps there are ways beyond myth to search for fingerprints of forgotten civilizations in the very chemistry of the planet. The sea is restless, Myths echo across cultures, but the question remains: if an advanced civilization once thrived 100,000 years ago, how could we possibly know? Stories carry whispers, but they are easily bent by time. What we need is something more stubborn, something that resists the erasure of centuries. In 2018, two scientists asked this very question. Gavin Schmidt, a climate scientist at NASA, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist from the University of Rochester, published a thought experiment with a name borrowed from science fiction, the Silurian Hypothesis. The name is playful, drawn from a race of ancient reptiles in the British series Doctor Who, but the question was serious. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years before humans, what traces would it leave behind in the geological record? And by extension, if such a civilization had existed a mere 100,000 years ago, would we even know it? Schmidt and Frank began by stripping away our usual assumptions. They reminded us that buildings, monuments, even bones are fragile on geological scales. 100,000 years erases nearly all structures. 1,000,000 years erases everything. So they asked, what lasts? Their answer, chemistry. Not the shape of a city, but the signature it leaves in the soil and air. Not monuments, but molecules. Already our civilization is leaving such fingerprints. Look at the atmosphere. Levels of carbon dioxide and methane have spiked far above natural background levels in the last 2 centuries, a mark of burning fossil fuels. These shifts will leave a chemical scar in sediments laid down during our time. Radioactive isotopes, produced by nuclear tests and reactors, will persist in trace amounts for tens of thousands of years. Synthetic compounds like plastics and fluorinated chemicals may degrade, but some of their breakdown products could survive far longer. The soil and oceans will remember us in ways stone cannot. Now turn the question backward. If an earlier civilization had once burned fuels, mined metals, or created synthetic compounds, might traces of those activities remain buried in sediments or ice cores? They would not look like cities, but like anomalies. Unexpected isotopes, strange chemical spikes, layers of carbon or nitrogen out of sync with natural cycles. They would be subtle, but they might be there, waiting in the rocks beneath our feet. The Silurian hypothesis does not claim such a civilization existed. It simply reframes the question. Instead of asking, where are the ruins? It asks, what fingerprints should we expect if ruins cannot survive? It urges us to search not for monuments, but for scars in the Earth's memory. This perspective is unsettling because it makes the possibility of deep past civilizations more plausible. It does not mean they were real, but it means that if they were, we would have almost no way of knowing unless we looked for the right signals. It also humbles us. Our own achievements, our cities, our monuments may not be what defines us in the geological record. Long after our towers fall, what will remain are chemical anomalies, isotopes, and scars in the sediment. A ghostly record that intelligence once reshaped the planet. Think about that for a moment. Imagine a future scientist, hundreds of thousands of years from now, drilling into the Earth. They would find layers of soil and rock, each telling a story. In one layer, they would see unusual spikes of carbon dioxide, evidence of sudden warming. In another, traces of radioactive isotopes, evidence of nuclear activity. They would see the unmistakable signs of a civilization that altered its environment. But the civilization itself would be gone, erased by time. The traces would be the only proof it was ever there. Now invert the thought. What if we, today, stumbled upon such a layer in rocks dated to 100,000 years ago? A spike in greenhouse gases without explanation. Strange isotopes where none should be. Compounds that should not exist in nature. Would we recognize them for what they were? Or would we explain them away as natural oddities, as mistakes in data, as contamination? Would we dismiss the fingerprints of a forgotten civilization because we do not expect to find them? The Silurian hypothesis challenges not just our understanding of the past, but our way of looking. It teaches us that expectation shapes discovery. If we only look for stone ruins, we will find stone ruins. If we do not search for chemical anomalies, we will not see them, even if they are there. It asks us to widen our imagination, to accept that the Earth itself may hold evidence of stories we never dreamed possible. And this raises another haunting possibility. What if we already have the evidence? What if anomalies in sediments, unexplained shifts in carbon cycles, or unusual isotopes have already been recorded but dismissed? What if the clues are scattered in scientific papers, filed away as data noise, waiting for someone to see the pattern? The Silurian Hypothesis does not give answers. It gives us a new lens, one that turns the question of lost civilizations from fantasy into something that science can, in principle, explore. It reminds us that time erases nearly all, but not quite everything. That even in silence, fingerprints remain. And if fingerprints can linger in sediments and stone, what of the strange objects sometimes unearthed in places they should not be? If chemical traces are one kind of anomaly, then physical anomalies, artifacts that seem too old, too advanced, too misplaced, are another. Myths give us echoes. Science gives us isotopes. But sometimes the Earth itself gives us objects that do not fit the timeline we believe. The ground beneath our feet is layered with memory. Each stratum of soil, each fold of stone, tells a story of what came before. Yet sometimes stories appear where they do not belong. A shard of pottery in the wrong age. A tool embedded in ancient rock. An object that should not exist in the context where it is found. These are the out-of-place anomalies. Artifacts that disrupt the tidy sequence of our timeline. They may be mistakes, misinterpretations, or accidents of geology, but they also keep alive a question: what if the past was stranger than we allow ourselves to imagine? One of the most famous examples is the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, this device, more than 2,000 years old, contains a complex arrangement of gears. It could predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and model celestial cycles. Historians once thought technology of this sophistication was impossible in that era, yet there it was, corroded by seawater, hidden until chance revealed it. The Antikythera mechanism is not from 100,000 years ago, but it reminds us of something vital. Human ingenuity often appears earlier than we expect, and it can be lost for centuries before being rediscovered. More controversial are the objects claimed to be far older. In the 1940s in Illinois, a lump of coal was reportedly broken open to reveal an iron pot. In South African mines, miners have unearthed small metallic spheres with grooves around their circumference, said to come from rock layers billions of years old. Most geologists explain these finds as natural formations, misunderstood or misrepresented, and yet their mystery persists in whispers. If one artifact were truly as old as claimed, it would upend everything we believe about the timeline of civilization. There are other stories scattered like fragments: the London hammer, encased in stone concretion, nails said to be found embedded in rock, carved figures in strata far older than human history allows. In most cases, further study reclassifies these objects as younger than claimed or as geological curiosities mistaken for artifacts. But the persistence of these tales reveals something deeper than the objects themselves. They reveal our hunger for possibility. They reveal our suspicion that history is not as simple as the textbooks say. Even when anomalies are explained away, they serve as reminders of how easily misinterpretation can happen. If we found a genuine object from 100,000 years ago, a tool, a device, a fragment of something advanced, would we recognize it for what it was? Or would we dismiss it, as we have with so many out-of-place finds, because it does not fit our expectations? Would a fragment of composite material be catalogued as an odd mineral? Would a corroded shape be mistaken for stone? Would evidence already lie in storage rooms unidentified because no one thought to ask the right question? The London hammer, the spheres, the mysterious iron pot, whether real anomalies or not, remind us of a larger truth. Context is everything. Archaeology depends on finding objects in situ, in undisturbed layers that allow precise dating. Without context, artifacts float free of meaning, They become curiosities, not evidence. And yet time itself works to destroy context. Erosion, landslides, floods, and earthquakes move objects, scatter them, and mix layers. A shard found in the wrong place may not be an impossibility, but a victim of nature's rearrangement. Still, even this complicates our confidence. If time scrambles the record, how sure can we be of what it tells us? The anomalies also reflect how fragile knowledge is. The Antikythera mechanism shows that brilliance can appear, then vanish, then be rediscovered much later. The same may be true on larger scales. An advanced civilization 100,000 years ago could have reached heights we cannot imagine, only for its achievements to vanish under ice, water, or soil. What would remain for us? Perhaps nothing more than isolated fragments found in the wrong place, dismissed as curiosities. These anomalies are important not because they prove anything, but because they keep the door open. They remind us that certainty is a luxury we do not truly have. They remind us that surprises do exist, that technology and complexity often emerge earlier than expected, and that the record of the past is incomplete. They whisper that the Earth may still hold objects we do not yet recognize for what they are. Think again of the Silurian Hypothesis. If chemical fingerprints are subtle traces of forgotten civilizations, then out-of-place anomalies are their physical counterparts. Fragments without context, hints without explanation. Neither alone can prove the existence of a lost advanced society. But together, they suggest that our view of the past may be narrower than it should be. If an advanced civilization thrived 100,000 years ago, its remains may not be grand ruins. They may be fragments scattered across the world, waiting in stone, buried in coal, hidden in strata. We may already have found some of them, misidentified and forgotten. To see them for what they are, we must be willing to ask the question most resist. Could this be more than coincidence? The Earth is filled with anomalies, scattered like puzzle pieces with no clear picture. Some are explained, some remain unresolved, some may never be answered. But they remind us to remain open, to accept that certainty is fragile, and that what does not fit the timeline may still be a piece of the truth. And if anomalies can suggest possibilities, then imagination must do the rest. For what if the very shape of civilization 100,000 years ago was unlike anything we expect? What if it did not leave behind stone cities or steel machines, but advanced along a different path altogether, a path that would leave almost nothing for us to find? When we imagine an advanced civilization, our minds reflexively conjure familiar images. We think of cities filled with towers, streets paved with stone, walls built of brick, machines of metal, vessels of glass and steel. We imagine something like us, perhaps older, perhaps stranger, but still grounded in the familiar grammar of cities and monuments. Yet this is our own bias, born from our experience. What if an advanced civilization 100,000 years ago did not look anything like ours? What if advancement does not always leave behind skyscrapers or engines, but instead thrives in ways that vanish cleanly into the soil of time? The assumption that civilization must equal urbanization is recent. For most of human history, societies were complex without cities. Hunter-gatherer groups maintained intricate knowledge systems about plants, animals, and landscapes. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of ocean without written maps, guided by stars, currents, and memory. Indigenous groups around the world cultivated forests and rivers, reshaping entire ecologies to sustain their needs, without erecting towering monuments. Complexity does not require cities. Intelligence does not require concrete. Now imagine a civilization that chose not to build in stone or metal at all. Imagine one that worked with organic materials, wood, reeds, resins, plant fibers. Imagine architecture grown rather than constructed, trees shaped into dwellings, roots woven into bridges, living walls cultivated instead of built. Such structures would be strong, adaptable, and beautiful. They would also be temporary in the scale of geology. Within centuries they would vanish, returning to soil. Within millennia, nothing would remain but the faintest changes in sediment. Within 100,000 years, even those traces would be gone. Or consider technology that was not mechanical but biological. Instead of engines powered by combustion, perhaps they mastered harnessing the energy of ecosystems. Instead of wires and circuits, perhaps they cultivated neural networks in living tissue. Instead of plastic and steel, perhaps they used composites that decayed back into nature without residue. In our eyes, this would be a miracle of sustainability. In theirs, it might have been ordinary life, but in the record of time, it would mean erasure. A civilization built on biodegradable technology would leave almost nothing for us to find. Even our definitions of advanced are narrow. We equate advancement with industrialization, smokestacks, machines, and metallurgy. But is that the only path? A people who mastered harmony with nature, who lived in balance rather than domination, might consider themselves far more advanced than us. They may have understood ecosystems in ways we cannot, treated consciousness as a tool, or explored dimensions of thought and memory we have only begun to guess at. Their advancement may have been inward, cultural, spiritual, ecological. Achievements invisible in stone or steel. This perspective matters for our question. If an advanced civilization thrived 100,000 years ago, but chose a different path, one not based on heavy industry or monumental construction, then we should not expect to find ruins. We should expect silence. That silence does not mean absence. It means we are searching for the wrong things. Think again of survival bias. Stone tools survive, so we imagine a world of stone. But what if those tools were only the simplest implements of a culture that also had technologies now lost to decay? Just as today, a plastic spoon and a smartphone exist side by side, but the spoon may endure longer in the soil, so too might simple stone tools endure, while the complex technologies of the past have vanished completely. We may be reconstructing the past from its least representative fragments. Our bias extends further. We look for cities because our own civilization is urban. We look for machines because our own civilization is mechanical. But these are not universal measures of advancement. To assume they are is to assume that the only possible path is ours. Yet history, even within the last few millennia, proves otherwise. The Maya and Inca thrived without the wheel for transport. The Polynesians thrived without metalworking. Each developed complexity on its own terms. Why should a civilization 100,000 years ago not do the same? Picture their world. Along coasts now drowned, perhaps they built networks of reed cities, floating structures anchored to the sea. Inland, perhaps they wove vast forests into habitats, their dwellings indistinguishable from nature. Perhaps their science was encoded not in tablets of stone, but in patterns of song and ritual, passed down in ways we cannot decode. Perhaps they explored the inner realms of consciousness, mapping dreams as carefully as we map stars. To us, this would not appear advanced. It would appear invisible, yet for them, it may have been the height of civilization. This possibility reframes our search. If we limit ourselves to looking for stone monuments and metal tools, we will miss what does not fit those categories. If we broaden our imagination, we may find new ways to read the earth. Subtle changes in soil chemistry, anomalous patterns in ecosystems, echoes in myth that speak of practices beyond our comprehension. Advancement does not have to be loud. It can be quiet, fleeting, and still transformative. And if this thought unsettles us, it is because it touches our own insecurity. We want to believe our path is the pinnacle, the only one that counts. But what if we are only one version, one possibility among many? What if there were civilizations before us that chose paths we cannot even imagine, paths that left behind no ruins, no monuments, no enduring artifacts, only silence? In that silence we see nothing, and we mistake it for absence. But silence can be misleading. It can conceal as well as erase. The possibility of civilizations without cities reminds us that our imagination must be broader than our evidence. What has not survived is not necessarily what never was. And if civilizations can thrive without leaving cities, what does that say about our own? We see ourselves as permanent, but perhaps we too are fragile, our achievements destined to vanish under the same weight of time. Which leads us to the next step, confronting the fragility of our own pinnacle and how easily it could disappear, leaving little more than silence behind. Stand in the center of a modern city and lift your gaze. Steel towers rise into the sky, their glass faces reflecting clouds. Roads and bridges knit the land together. Lights pulse in patterns that never sleep. It feels immovable, a triumph of permanence. Yet permanence is an illusion. Civilization, even ours, rests on fragile foundations. To see this clearly, imagine the world 100,000 years from now, not as it might progress, but as it might endure if it were abandoned. Begin with the short span. Within decades of abandonment, windows shatter, plants grow through cracks, animals reclaim the streets. Bridges rust, roofs collapse, the hum of power fades, leaving silence. Within centuries, forests spread across suburbs, deserts reclaim highways, seas flood coastal cities. Within millennia, towers fall completely, buried under soil or swept away by erosion. Human structures, no matter how massive, are temporary when left to the elements. Concrete, the backbone of our age, is not eternal. Without maintenance, it crumbles, fractures, and returns to dust. Steel corrodes into flakes of iron oxide. Aluminum oxidizes and disintegrates. Plastics fragment into dust, scattered through soil and sea. Even glass, though resilient, shatters and weathers. Digital archives, the sum of our knowledge, depend on fragile media. Hard drives fail within decades, paper within centuries. If no one tends them, they vanish. In only a few thousand years, the record of who we were would be erased almost entirely. Stretch the vision further. 10,000 years, the length of recorded history, passes, and our cities would already be gone. Rivers would reroute, flooding foundations. Forests would grow where skyscrapers once stood. Glaciers might return, grinding entire regions flat. Volcanoes would erupt, spreading ash across continents. In 100,000 years, nearly all traces of us would be gone. At most, the Earth would hold subtle scars, unusual layers of sediment, traces of carbon and plastic embedded in stone, radioactive isotopes buried in soil. Our monuments would not define us. Our chemical footprint would. This is the unsettling mirror. If our own civilization would leave so little after 100,000 years, how can we expect more of any civilization that came before? The silence of archaeology is not proof of absence. It is the natural outcome of time. Even the pinnacle of our age, with its satellites, towers and machines, is fragile in the scale of deep time. Consider our satellites, orbiting silently above. They circle like beads of light, carrying signals, images, and data. But in a few centuries, their orbits will decay. They will fall into the atmosphere and burn. Only fragments of metal might reach the ground. The rest will vanish into air. Our greatest technological achievements will not endure as monuments in space, but as fleeting streaks of fire across the sky. Or think of nuclear power. Its most enduring legacy may not be the plants themselves, which will corrode and crumble, but the isotopes they release. A thin chemical signature, detectable in sediments, may outlast every city and every machine. That is what the Silurian Hypothesis teaches us. Civilizations are remembered not by their monuments, but by their scars in the earth. What humbles us is the recognition that survival is not guaranteed. We like to imagine ourselves as permanent, the first and only beings to rise so high. But if another civilization once thrived 100,000 years ago, their silence teaches us a lesson. No matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, every pinnacle is fragile. Time does not care. Time folds all into silence. This fragility reframes our arrogance. We see ourselves as unique, but what if we are only another crest in the tide? Civilizations rise like waves, reaching upward, gleaming in the light, then breaking, dissolving back into the sea. If so, our wave will break too. Perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not for centuries, but eventually. And when it does, the traces will vanish quickly, leaving only whispers. Imagine a future archaeologist, hundreds of millennia from now, digging into the earth. They find a thin layer of plastic fragments, microscopic but persistent. They find a spike of carbon dioxide, a faint trace of radiation. They puzzle over these anomalies, debating their meaning. They never know the full story of our towers, our machines, our art, our struggles. For them, our world is invisible. They see only chemical hints. Would they imagine us advanced? Or would they assume we were crude, because the record does not speak of glass and steel? This is the fragile pinnacle, the recognition that what we see as solid is transient, that even our proudest achievements are temporary scars in the shifting body of the earth, and that if another civilization once stood where we stand, its silence is not surprising. It is inevitable. The thought leaves us humbled, but also curious. If civilizations rise and fall, if each leaves behind only fragments or scars, what forces bring about their endings? Is it always the slow erosion of time, or can catastrophe reset the world in a single stroke, sweeping away all at once what took millennia to build? The earth does not move gently. Beneath its surface, fire churns. Above, skies shift, winds rage, and oceans rise. Civilization, no matter how advanced, rests on fragile ground. It can endure the slow erosion of centuries, but what of sudden catastrophe? What of events so violent they can reset the planet in a single stroke? If an advanced society thrived 100,000 years ago, perhaps it was not erased only by time's steady hand, but by disaster's swift blow. Begin with the volcano. 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia erupted with unimaginable force. The explosion was one of the largest in the last 2 million years. Ash covered vast regions, darkening skies, cooling the earth. Some scientists believe it triggered a volcanic winter, shrinking human populations to a handful of survivors. Others debate its exact impact, but the scale is undeniable. A single eruption can destabilize climate, agriculture, and life across continents. If a civilization had existed then, it could have been brought to its knees within years. Cities starved, societies fractured, survivors scattered. After generations, little would remain but memory, and then silence. Then there are asteroids. 66 million years ago, one ended the reign of the dinosaurs in a single impact. The Chicxulub asteroid struck with the force of billions of nuclear bombs, igniting fires, sending tsunamis across oceans, plunging the planet into darkness. Life eventually recovered, but entire lineages vanished forever. Scale that forward to 100,000 years ago. An asteroid much smaller than Chicxulub could still devastate the Earth, wiping out civilizations without a trace. Craters may survive, but in time erosion softens them. Unless we know where to look, the scar may vanish into the landscape, leaving us to forget what was lost. The climate itself can be a destroyer. Ice ages advance, locking away oceans, reshaping continents. Warming returns, flooding coasts, drowning fertile lands. Civilizations dependent on coastlines and agriculture, as ours is today, would find themselves broken, displaced, reduced to scattered remnants. Flood myths across cultures may carry memories of such events. Rising seas need not erase stone walls immediately, but over thousands of years, waves grind them down, bury them under silt, and fold them into the seabed. Catastrophe need not be sudden to be total. And then there is the possibility of self-destruction. Advanced societies, by their very nature, carry risks. Fire harnessed for warmth becomes fire harnessed for war. Knowledge meant to heal becomes knowledge that poisons. Our own world trembles under nuclear weapons, chemical industries, and climate change. If we were to collapse, would it not be by our own hands as much as by nature's? Perhaps the same was true of any who came before. Their knowledge, their tools, their ambitions might have carried within them the seeds of their undoing. What is striking is how quickly collapse can erase centuries of growth. In the ruins of Rome, weeds grew within years of abandonment. In the jungles of Central America, entire cities of the Maya were swallowed within generations. On Easter Island, stone statues stared out across empty coasts, remnants of a society that had cut down its last tree. If collapse can erase so much in so little time, how much more in 100,000 years? Even a thriving world can become invisible when catastrophe strikes. Consider our own vulnerability. A massive solar storm could cripple power grids across the globe. A nuclear exchange could darken skies, plunging us into famine. A pandemic, unchecked, could empty cities in months. Climate collapse could drown coasts and scorch plains. Each scenario is possible within our own lifetimes. Each could reset civilization. If this is true for us, why not for those before us? The Earth does not grant immunity to progress. Advancement is no shield against destruction. The notion of reset forces us to see history differently. Perhaps civilization is not a straight line, but a cycle. Growth, flourishing, collapse, silence. Then slowly, growth again. Each time memory fades. Each time survivors begin anew, unaware of what came before. The Earth carries on, indifferent, folding each chapter under new layers. We see ourselves as unique, but perhaps we are only one of many attempts. And if catastrophe has struck before, what clues remain? Ash layers in ice cores, anomalous craters softened by erosion, sudden die-offs in the fossil record, legends of floods and fire. None of these alone prove an advanced civilization. Yet together, they suggest the world has endured resets many times. And if we see those resets as only natural, perhaps we are overlooking their human dimension. Societies that vanished not just as victims of nature, but as civilizations undone by their own weight. This thought is sobering because it turns our gaze inward. To wonder about civilizations erased 100,000 years ago is also to wonder about ourselves. Are we next in the cycle? Are we building toward permanence or toward collapse? The fragility of our pinnacle suggests the latter. The question is not whether the Earth will endure, but whether we will. Catastrophe and reset remind us that erasure can be swift, total, and merciless. If another civilization once stood here, its end may have come suddenly, leaving only shadows. And if ends can come so quickly, what of beginnings? Could traces of lost civilizations survive, not in ruins or myths, but within us? In the very fabric of who we are, carried forward in ways more intimate than stone or story. Beneath the skin, deeper than muscle and bone, deeper than blood and breath, lies a library. It is not written in stone or paper, but in sequences of 4 letters, repeating, folding, stretching across billions of combinations. This library is the genome, the hidden script of who we are. And unlike cities that crumble or myths that distort, DNA can endure, carried forward within living bodies. If an advanced civilization thrived 100,000 years ago, perhaps its most lasting traces are not in ruins or artifacts, but in us. Modern genetics has revealed how much of our story is older than we thought. For decades, we believed Homo sapiens stood apart, a separate line. But then, sequencing showed otherwise. Neanderthals, once dismissed as brutish cousins, live on within us. Their DNA makes up 1 to 2% of the genome of people outside Africa. Denisovans, a mysterious group discovered from a single finger bone and tooth, contribute fragments to populations in Asia and Oceania. These ghosts live in our cells, whispering that species overlap, mix, and carry each other forward. The past is never fully gone. It breathes in us. If DNA can carry fragments of Neanderthals and Denisovans across tens of thousands of years, what else might it carry? Could there be whispers of a lineage older still? A people whose sophistication left no monuments, but who nonetheless left their trace in our blood? Such a thought is speculative, yet not impossible. We know that many branches of the human tree are lost. We know there are gaps in our ancestry, populations that lived, thrived, and disappeared, leaving only genetic echoes. Could some of those echoes belong to a civilization more advanced than we imagine? The genome does not tell us about cities or machines. It cannot describe temples or ships, but it can hint at encounters, interbreeding, shared lives, overlapping histories. In our cells are clues to migrations, to population bottlenecks, to times when humanity nearly vanished and then rose again. Each of these moments aligns with possible catastrophes: volcanic winters, ice age shifts, floods. Survivors carried forward not their monuments, but their genes. We are their continuity, their legacy written not in stone but in flesh. Already, whispers in the genome shape us. Variants from Neanderthals influence our immune systems, our skin, even our sleep. Denisovan DNA helps some populations adapt to high altitudes. The past is practical as well as poetic. It alters how we breathe, how we fight disease, how we thrive in different landscapes. We are mosaics, patchworks of forgotten peoples. If one of those peoples carried knowledge or complexity we do not recognize, then in some way, fragments of their presence live on within us. But here lies the haunting limit. DNA records biology, not culture. It tells us that others lived, but not what they dreamed. It tells us that others intermingled, but not what they knew. A civilization could vanish, its knowledge lost, its stories silenced, while its genetic signature lingers invisibly within us. We carry the body, but not the mind. We carry the echo, but not the song. And yet even this is powerful. It means the line between us and them is not sharp. It means humanity is not a single story, but a tapestry of many. If civilization is fragile, people endure. If knowledge is erased, genes persist. If cities vanish, the body remembers. We may never decode those whispers fully, but their existence reminds us that the past is inside us, not just behind us. This perspective reshapes the question. An advanced civilization 100,000 years ago may never leave ruins we can find. But its people may have survived in fragments, mixing with others, passing along their DNA until it reached us. If so, then we are not just their successors. We are their children. The memory of their existence lives in our very cells, even if their achievements do not. To think of this is to feel humility. We are not alone in our lineage. We are built from many forgotten worlds, many vanished peoples. The silence of archaeology is not the whole story. The genome whispers another truth, that even when civilizations fall, something carries forward. That something is us. But if DNA carries fragments of lost peoples, time itself carries another kind of loss. Memory eroded by distance. 100,000 years is vast, 20 times longer than the span of recorded history. If we can lose so much in 5 millennia, what vanishes in 100? What gaps open when time stretches farther than memory can reach? History as we know it stretches back a mere 5,000 years. Clay tablets pressed with cuneiform, inscriptions on stone, papyrus scrolls, these are the first true voices of the human story. Before that, the silence grows louder. Archaeologists extend our vision farther, to 10 or 12,000 years, with monumental sites like Göbekli Tepe. But beyond that, the record dissolves. 50,000 years ago, our ancestors left paintings on cave walls. 70,000 years ago, beads carved from shells. But when we reach 100,000 years, the silence becomes nearly total. This gap, between the flickering light of history and the abyss of deep time, is so vast that it becomes difficult even to imagine. Consider the scale. 5,000 years ago, the pyramids of Egypt were already ancient to their builders. 10,000 years ago, humans were sowing the first seeds of agriculture. 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals still walked the earth. 100,000 years ago is 20 times farther back than the pyramids, 10 times older than agriculture, double the span since Neanderthals thrived. It is not a distance of centuries or millennia, but a gulf of time so deep it swallows memory, story, and artifact alike. We forget how fragile memory is. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen within a few hundred years, leaving behind only ruins and scattered texts. The Maya built great cities in Central America, but by the time Europeans arrived, much of their knowledge had been lost. The Indus Valley civilization spanned thousands of years, yet we still cannot read its script. These are civilizations only 4 to 5 millennia old, and already their stories are incomplete. If we struggle to understand them, how can we hope to reconstruct a world 100 millennia removed? Even within written history, the gaps are startling. Libraries burn, languages die, knowledge is forgotten. The works of entire schools of philosophy survive only as fragments quoted by later writers. Vast archives of science and art are lost to war, fire, or neglect. If so much can vanish within centuries, the weight of 100,000 years is crushing. It leaves not only silence, but amnesia. This is the time gap problem, the recognition that our evidence of the past grows thinner the farther back we look, until it vanishes almost completely. Archaeology salvages fragments, a bone here, a tool there, a shard of pigment. But these are whispers, not voices. They cannot tell the full story. They cannot confirm or deny the possibility of complexity. They simply leave us with questions. Think of it as a photograph album. The last 5,000 years are a series of clear images. The last 10,000 faded snapshots. The last 50,000 torn and blurry fragments. The last 100,000 almost nothing but blank pages. We assume those pages are empty because nothing was written, but perhaps the ink has simply faded beyond recognition. The time gap is not just about artifacts, it is about imagination. Our minds struggle to hold spans so vast. We compress them, skipping from cave paintings to pyramids as if the distance were small. But it is not. 50,000 years is longer than all of recorded history combined. Doubling it to 100,000 multiplies the uncertainty. Anything could have happened in that gulf, and we would scarcely know. This is why the idea of a lost advanced civilization is difficult to dismiss outright. Not because we have proof, but because the gap is so wide that absence of proof is meaningless. We have built a timeline from the fragments we can see, but those fragments are scattered along the last narrow edge of human existence. Beyond that edge lies an ocean of time, unexplored, largely unsearchable, filled with possibilities we cannot easily imagine. To stand at the edge of this gap is to feel humility. Our confidence in history rests on a sliver of time. Our certainty dissolves when we look deeper. If civilizations rise and fall, if knowledge is gained and lost, then the silence of 100,000 years is more than enough to erase almost everything. The time gap problem reminds us that our story may not be as simple as we think. It may not be a straight line from primitive to advanced, but a fractured journey with chapters erased. We may be living in only the latest chapter, unaware of those before. And if time can erase entire civilizations, then what of knowledge itself? Even within the span we know, entire bodies of knowledge have been lost. Technologies forgotten, skills abandoned, wisdom erased. To look at the gap is to see not just the loss of ruins, but the loss of understanding. And if knowledge can vanish in centuries, what disappears in 100 millennia? Knowledge is not as permanent as we imagine. We think of it as cumulative, an endless staircase rising higher with each generation. But history shows otherwise. Knowledge is fragile. It can be forgotten, abandoned, erased by disaster, or hidden behind the veil of time. To understand how easily an advanced civilization could vanish 100,000 years ago, we need only look at how much we ourselves have already lost in the brief span of recorded history. Consider Rome. The Romans built aqueducts that carried water across miles with precise gradients. They mixed volcanic ash into their concrete, creating a material that still resists the sea 2,000 years later. When Rome fell, much of this knowledge went with it. Medieval builders could not replicate Roman cement. For centuries, their structures were weaker, more fragile. The secret of Roman concrete had to be rediscovered by modern science. What was once ordinary became extraordinary, lost to the cracks of time. Or think of Greek fire, the legendary weapon of the Byzantine Empire, a substance that burned even on water, terrifying enemies and securing naval supremacy for centuries. Its formula was so guarded that when the empire fell, the secret disappeared entirely. To this day, no one knows exactly what it was. The knowledge, once a matter of survival, has become a mystery. The Indus Valley civilization is another reminder. They flourished 5,000 years ago, building cities with sophisticated drainage systems, precise weights and measures, and urban planning unparalleled for their time. And yet, we cannot read their script. Their language is lost, their stories silenced. We know they existed, but not what they believed, how they governed, or what they dreamed. In a few millennia, their voice has become mute. Even myths hold fragments of lost knowledge. The Polynesians navigated the Pacific without maps or compasses, using stars, currents, and the flight of birds. Their knowledge was embodied, passed down orally, not written in books. When colonization disrupted these traditions, much was forgotten. Only fragments survive today, reconstructed painstakingly by scholars and practitioners. What was once living wisdom nearly vanished in a few generations. If knowledge can vanish in centuries, what of tens of thousands of years? What of 100,000? Entire sciences, entire worldviews, entire technologies could rise, flourish, and disappear without leaving a trace. Even if fragments endured, they would likely be incomprehensible to us, just as the Indus script is unreadable today. This truth reframes how we view advancement. We assume progress is permanent, that once discovered, knowledge cannot be lost. But the past disproves this. Mathematics advanced under the Greeks, yet much was forgotten until the Renaissance. The use of steam power was known to Hero of Alexandria in the 1st century CE, but remained a novelty, forgotten until industrialization revived it nearly 2 millennia later. Progress is not a line, it is a cycle of discovery and forgetting. The lessons of lost knowledge humble us. They remind us that even civilizations we can see and touch are incomplete. How much more incomplete must be our view of civilizations erased by time? If we cannot reconstruct the formula of Greek fire after 1,000 years, how could we hope to reconstruct the technologies of a people who may have thrived 100,000 years ago? And yet, these losses also give us a strange kind of hope. They prove that knowledge can exist without leaving obvious traces. They prove that civilizations can be more sophisticated than the fragments we hold suggest. They keep alive the possibility that others before us may have risen, may have built, may have dreamed, and that their dreams were simply lost, not because they lacked power, but because memory is fragile. This fragility touches our own time as well. Our digital world feels permanent, yet it is the most vulnerable archive in history. Hard drives degrade, servers fail, formats become obsolete. Without constant care, our digital records could vanish in centuries. Imagine, then, what would remain in 100,000 years. Perhaps only a few fragments encoded in unexpected places, perhaps nothing at all. Our age, too, could become a silence, remembered only in faint chemical traces or myths carried forward by survivors. The lesson is clear. Knowledge is not cumulative but contingent. It survives only as long as people carry it, protect it, and pass it on. The moment that chain breaks, knowledge fades. Civilizations fall not just when their walls collapse, but when their wisdom is lost. If that can happen in a few centuries, what might be erased in 100 millennia? This thought pushes us closer to the heart of the question. If undeniable proof of a lost civilization emerged today, how would we react? What would it mean for science, for culture, for the way we see ourselves? The possibility of knowledge lost makes us imagine knowledge found, and the shock it would bring if it surfaced in our time. Imagine the moment. A diver descends along the edge of a continental shelf, the light of their torch cutting through green water. Beneath the silt, something geometric glints. Not a rock, not coral, but a pattern of carved lines. Or perhaps it is a geologist splitting a core of ancient sediment, and there, in the layers, is a chemical anomaly so distinct, so deliberate, that it cannot be explained by nature. Or perhaps it is an archaeologist digging in a cave, uncovering an artifact of metal or composite, unmistakably crafted, dated to 100,000 years ago. The moment would be shattering. What would it mean to us if proof emerged, undeniable, unambiguous, that an advanced civilization thrived in that distant time? First, disbelief. The scientific community would test, retest, demand replication. Laboratories across the world would measure isotopes, confirm dates, check for contamination. At first, many would assume a mistake, a hoax, or an anomaly. But then, as evidence mounted, the realization would spread. History is not what we thought. The textbooks would crumble. Every neat timeline we learned in school would be rewritten. Humanity would no longer be seen as the first or only civilization to rise to complexity. We would be inheritors, not pioneers. The story of human uniqueness, of progress as a straight line culminating in us, would dissolve. Instead, history would appear as a cycle. Rise, fall, silence, rise again. We would no longer be alone in time. The cultural impact would be profound. Religions might be challenged, their narratives disrupted by the existence of forgotten peoples outside their frameworks. Philosophers would debate what it means to be human if others came before us with intelligence equal or greater. Nations might claim ownership of the discovery, seeking to tie themselves to the prestige of the ancient world. And ordinary people would feel both wonder and unease. Wonder at the depth of our story, unease at the fragility it reveals. Science, too, would change. Archaeology would no longer dig only for fragments of our own ancestors, but for the ruins of a forgotten age. Ocean floors would be mapped more carefully, ice sheets drilled not just for climate, but for anomalies. Geologists would re-examine layers of sediment, looking for subtle signatures of technology. What was once fringe would become urgent. The search for the first civilization would expand. Not 5,000 years back, not 10, but 100,000. And what of our imagination? If proof emerged, we would ask, what did they build? What did they know? Did they master sciences beyond ours? Did they fall because of catastrophe, or because of themselves? Were they like us at all, or did they walk a different path, one we can barely conceive? The discovery would not end the mystery. It would deepen it, pulling us into questions larger than evidence can answer. There would also be fear. If civilizations can rise and vanish so completely, what does that say about us? If others reached heights before us and fell, what prevents us from doing the same? The discovery would be a mirror, forcing us to see our own fragility. Perhaps we would realize that we too are temporary, that our towers and technologies are not permanent pinnacles, but brief flashes in the vast silence of time. But beyond fear, there would be awe. To know we are not the first is to see ourselves differently. We are part of a longer story, one in which civilizations are waves, each cresting, breaking, and dissolving into the sea of time. The thought does not diminish us. It expands us. It means that intelligence has arisen more than once on this planet, that creativity and knowledge are woven into the fabric of life itself. It means that what we are is not unique, but recurring, a rhythm written into the earth. And in this realization, we may find both humility and responsibility. Humility, because we are not the first. Responsibility, because if others have fallen, we may fall too, unless we learn from their silence. Proof of a lost civilization would not only reshape our past, it would reshape our future, reminding us that survival is not guaranteed, that permanence is an illusion, and that time waits for no one. If proof emerged today, it would be the greatest discovery in human history. Yet it would not close the mystery. It would open it wider, leaving us to ask not only what they were, but why they vanished. And that question would echo, unsettling, unresolved, reminding us of our own fragility. For if they fell, so can we. And so the story bends back to silence. For beyond discovery, beyond awe, lies the deeper truth. History is not a single line, but an endless story, folded and refolded, its chapters erased and written again. If proof appeared today, it would not give us an ending. It would only remind us that endings are never final, that the story of civilization is endless, and that we, too, are only one chapter among many. The journey returns us to quiet. After moving through myths and science, through floods and fires, through whispers of genomes and shadows beneath ice, we arrive where we began, with a question. What if an advanced civilization thrived on Earth 100,000 years ago? No matter how far we have wandered, no matter how many fragments we have examined, the question remains unresolved. It lingers, like mist over water, like a memory that refuses to fade. Perhaps this is the true lesson of the journey, that history is not a single thread, but a tapestry woven from many strands, most of which are missing. We see only fragments, only what the earth has spared us. We assume the silence between those fragments is emptiness. But silence is not nothing. Silence is potential. Silence is the place where lost voices may still be echoing. Civilizations rise like waves. Each crest gleams for a moment in the light, then falls, dissolving into the sea. We like to think we are different, that our wave will last forever. But the earth has seen countless waves before us. Mountains rise, rivers shift, glaciers advance, seas drown the land. Against such forces, even the greatest works are fragile. Time folds all things back into itself. Time erases, but it also recycles, carrying forward fragments into new stories. And perhaps this is why the idea of a forgotten civilization is so haunting. It reminds us that we are not permanent. It reminds us that memory is fragile, knowledge fleeting, monuments temporary. It reminds us that to be human is not to command eternity, but to live briefly in the stream of time. Whether others came before us or not, the possibility forces us to see ourselves differently, not as the first, but as part of something larger, something cyclical, something endless. Even if we never find proof, the act of imagining changes us. To wonder about lost civilizations is to expand our sense of time, to see human history not as a narrow line, but as a field of possibilities. It is to acknowledge humility, that the world is older, deeper, more mysterious than our records can hold. It is to accept that much has been erased, and that much will be erased again. And yet within that humility is awe that we exist at all, that we can ask these questions, that we can look back into the silence and hear faint echoes. Awe that we are part of a story too vast to finish, a story that began long before us and will continue long after. The endless story of civilization is not about certainty. It is about possibility. It is about the folds of time, the erased legacies, the glowing ruins that shimmer only in imagination. As the journey closes, the night is quiet once more. The earth rests beneath your feet, steady yet restless. The stars wheel above, as they always have, as they always will. You feel the presence of those who came before, whether real or imagined, lingering like shadows in the silence. You realize that history is not fixed ground, but shifting soil, and that we too will one day be folded into that silence, remembered only if fragments survive. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the value is not in certainty, but in wonder. To live with questions is to live awake. To honor what may have been is to deepen our reverence for what is. We walk in a world layered with memory, most of it unseen, most of it erased. But sometimes in myths, in anomalies, in the quiet hum of DNA, we catch a glimpse of what might lie beneath. The story has no final answer, only this. We are part of an endless cycle, one crest among many in the tide of time. Others may have come before, others may come after. We are not alone in possibility, only in memory. And as we fade, our echo will join theirs, folded into the earth, waiting for someone else to ask the question again. If you found this journey through silence and possibility meaningful, consider subscribing. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight and at what time?